Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. This is part 2 of our interview with Richard C. Wilson.
So many good things right in there that he was kind of packed into one. So one is one of my early on mentors, I should have said, is Jeffrey Gitomer. And he changed my life when he said in a book that I read in college, I didn't even know the family office space existed yet, but he said, I'll give away my number one secret out of all my best-selling books. This is the number one most valuable paragraph, and all my competitors could read this, but I don't care because they're all too lazy to follow it.
CEO of the Family Office Club, author of the best-selling book in the family office space, number one podcast in the space, runs tons of great events. If you missed part 1, please go back and listen and hear about all the stuff he's done. But Richard, when we were leaving off on part 1, we were talking about the value of actually having integrity and treating everyone like a real life person instead of, sorting people as the people who matter and the people who don't. Mm-hmm. What's another one of your piece of advice for folks who they want to approach these ultra high net worth individuals, and if you had a soapbox about here's something that you really can't overdo, what's another one of those things?
Another one that comes right after integrity, but is somewhat connected, is intentionality. So Dan Sullivan is a mentor of mine, and I think that he has a saying, a quote, that the most intentional person in the room wins. And it's not at the expense of anyone else. It doesn't mean anyone else loses. But when you're highly intentional about why you're giving a talk to a local estate planning group, or you're highly intentional about why you're traveling all the way to Denver to speak in front of some real estate investment professionals, et cetera, then you can be much more effective. You can say, oh, well, my big goal here is to earn some referral partners, so maybe I should have a handout. Or my big goal is to add as much value as possible to these individuals raising capital, so I should bring a worksheet so they can implement the advice I have and leave with a practical worksheet completed, versus all the other speakers that just get up there with the PowerPoint and have some nice ideas and theories, but the next speaker gets up and then people halfway forget about them. So being very intentional about every investor meeting you go to is one of them. And then another thing that's really critical, it took me 10 years of running the Family Office Club and getting over $1 billion worth of investment advisory agreements signed to learn this, is that every deal that gets closed can be looked at through a lens of 3 different areas of trust. And I see this as kind of trust curves. And the 3 areas would be trust in you as the executive and your executive team. And trust within your industry, in the ecosystem. So again, it could be that they've known you for a very long time, but maybe they've never invested in blockchain or never invested in self-storage or stem cells. They don't know the industry. And then the third area would be trust in the specific deal at hand. So if you've got a deal, self-storage unit on 8th Street for $5 million and they're local to the deal, that makes it easier. If they've invested in that actual deal, they're on the cap table now, obviously that makes it much, much easier. It could get higher on the trust curve of getting to know that specific deal. So every time you go into an investor meeting, just know that if you're starting at ground zero, they don't know you, they don't know your team, they don't know your industry, they don't know the deal, then you're going to be dead in the water, or it's just going to take a very long time to convert them, especially if they're sophisticated or connected to a lot of deal flow. It's just going to be a rough meeting. You're not going to get a ton of momentum typically. If you go into a meeting and they already know the industry very, very well, then they can quickly assess whether your deal has merit that should be rewarded with more energy and due diligence or not. And it's just going to be a better use of both parties' time. And so you want to really make sure you're going to as many meetings where people are already up 1 or 2 of those trust curves as possible. And that is why everyone starts with friends and family money, because they're so far up the trust curve on you or your team that they're willing to get by on those other 2, maybe at a slightly lower level. And it's also why if you're raising capital for stem cells, you might go to a healthcare professionals, or if you're raising capital for something in a specific industry, the easiest way to raise capital would be to go to locals and people who have made money in that industry. So those 3 trust curves, I think, are really central, and I've never heard anyone else bring it up, and it just took me a decade to stumble on that. But I think it's a way to interpret what's going on and walk into a meeting with high intentionality of what curve you're trying to move somebody up.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to maybe get your advice on something. So before the show, we were talking about how my partner and I that used to run our energy fund, we're looking at doing something really aligned with kind of the real estate investing he's been doing for the last 25 years. And if we were your example client and we said, hey, we want to work with local billionaires here in the Park City area, and approach them on a thing where, they buy an ideal asset for syndication, and our team's coming in to, maybe do a Reg A plus offering or something like that, and syndicate it out at a more favorable cap rate and split the upside, something like that. When you think about, trying to gather the different points you brought here, approaching families who have significant real estate holdings and have that background, looking at assets that are regionally, regional here, easy for them to see how something like this is going to work and go do their diligence in person. What other kind of considerations would you tell us to be really thinking hard about in a scenario like that?
Sure. One thing is I wouldn't limit it to billionaires. And I think that some of the numbers are really interesting on this. So there are 211,000 professionals that Bloomberg and WealthX and Financial Times, this quote's from WealthX, but 211,000 individuals globally who are worth $30 million or more. Almost none of these people are famous. Almost none of them would be on in magazines and front page of newspapers, et cetera. These are under the radar, 99% of them in my experience. It's not an exact statistic, but they're virtually all under the radar. Then there are 55,000, I think it's 56,000 actually through WealthX was a quote, of $100 million plus net worth individuals globally. And there's only 3,000 identified billionaires, and that's husband, wife combined. It doesn't count if you've got two brothers or some cousins, and altogether you're worth $1 billion plus. You'd just be in the centimillionaire category. But it's just important to know that there are, almost 15, 16 times, a little bit more than 16 times as many centimillionaires as billionaires. And for most people raising capital, as long as they're ultra wealthy and they're 30 million plus, they're probably qualified enough. So I think if you think at the 30 million plus level and you think, where do these people congregate? What associations are they part of? What athletic clubs do they go to? Are they at the local Porsche club, et cetera? So I'm always trying out different communities so I can just naturally meet more family offices. So I found a place to live where instead of it being hard to meet family offices, it's more enjoyable, better weather, lower taxes. And just in my 4-year-old's preschool class, there's several family offices. So I meet more pushing my kid on the swings at the park or going to the beach on the weekend, just enjoying time with my family. I meet family offices on accident versus it being a struggle to. So it makes where I live an investment and more enjoyable than where I was before. Another example is being in a business owner club that you can afford to be in for the spot you're at. So I used to be in one that cost $7,000 a year. It was good. I made a few valuable contacts. I then joined one that cost $25,000 a year. The business grew in part because of it, but largely just the business grew overall. And now I've been able to afford being in one that's a $50,000 a year membership, and I meet amazing contacts in there that have contacts themselves that are worth 30 million, 100 million plus. Most of the people in the group are worth 30 million or 100 million plus. Some are going to have big exits. Some already have. So I think always playing around with different things that connect with who you are and where you are, so you're naturally meeting potential investors without having to try too hard, is really critical. And that includes where your office is based, and different things you're passionate about. It could be a yacht club, golf club. I used to be part of a Bentley Rolls-Royce owners club, and it was not productive, so I dropped that one, and I'm always experimenting with one or two.
It's interesting, this idea of just physically being present at the watering hole where folks are. There's the billionaire that Jackie Kennedy married after JFK was killed. He said if he lost all his money, what he would do is go dig ditches and until he could afford a bowl of soup, and then go eat a bowl of soup at the fanciest restaurant in the city, because that's where he could be in the physical proximity of the people who were figuring out what to do next.
Right. And, yeah.
It sounds almost too simple to physically be, just figure out how to physically be in the same room with those folks. But it makes life so much easier than getting through how many gatekeepers and in the inbox with 300 new emails today.
For sure, for sure. And I stole the strategy from my friend Thomas, who does estate planning, and he said that he moved to the poorest neighborhood, the richest neighborhood in all of Chicago, but he had the most run-down, junk, tear-down house he could barely afford and was stressed out from the payments for it. But all of his neighbors were CFOs of publicly traded companies and founders and people that had exits. And over time, they became clients, and now he has one of the largest houses in the neighborhood, and he's got a 40-person team on his estate planning organization. And I heard that, and I said, wow, that's amazing. And when he had told me that, I was residing in Portland, Oregon, which is pretty much the worst place in the United States for family office work. And I was paying a lot of state taxes, and I went from having a very nice 5-bedroom house right next to Intel World Headquarters, where my mortgage and interest, taxes, everything was costing me $1,500 a month, and I took the jump to move from that with my family and 2 kids to live in a 3-bedroom condo on an island outside of Miami and pay $4,400 a month in rent instead of $1,500 for the mortgage. But it's an investment now, and there's an ROI off that because of the relationships. You get to enjoy it more. And importantly, if you live in a high-tax state, the difference in $1,500 a month and $4,400 a month was paid for just in the tax savings. So really, Oregon paid me to leave. They said, we don't want you here. If you're a business person, get the hell out. This is for cannabis and, breweries and, organic hipsters that like hemp, right? So I just would point that out to some people. Say, oh, I can't afford that, or like, oh, that's crazy, or oh, that's easy to say since you have a lot of success now and a lot of money coming in now. But I started with $800 in the bank account and $1,000 a month rent in Harvard Square in Boston. So everything that I'm talking about is things that you can use on a very small scale and then through a lot of hard work and effort build up over time.
Well, I'd love to hear a bit more about that. What's funny is it's interesting that the principle applies no matter what you're interested in. For the last 10 years, we've had a charity called Child Rescue Association that combats child sex trafficking. And on the consulting side of things, I was able to ask our military clients if they had any special ops folks they could connect us to. And we just started working a lot with folks from the intelligence community and the special operations community as clients. And sometimes I was giving them deals and stuff like this because I knew that just the physical proximity, we were going to be able to recruit volunteers for our charity. And it turned out extremely well. It's right now our CEO is a guy who just got out of one of the classified units of special ops. And it was I would love to say like I'm so charismatic and we had such a good strategy for getting, former FBI agents and Central Intelligence officers, right? But right. It was proximity and just, figuring out how to finagle the proximity and then have like a real organic human-to-human conversation,
Yeah, for sure. And I would just take away excuses for people that say they don't have time to do thought leadership, because thought leadership really works, and you just get good at it by practicing and having the right intentions of adding genuine value. I'm not like an amazing public speaker. I know that for sure, but you get more articulate over time as you get more practice, and that comes off better when you're in meetings or when you're writing an email. You can just be more clear in your communications because of the practice you've had in explaining what you do and what's going on in your industry. And then also, I'm very bad at writing. I had got my MBA, and I took some psychology courses through the Harvard ALM program, and my TA from the Czech Republic spoke Czech as her first language, and she looked over my final paper that I'd revised many times, and we sat down together, and I saw it was just covered in red ink, and her first question to me was, is English your first language? And it is. And she just destroyed me, and I've written 13 books. I just use book editors. So you can use an excuse to do nothing, or you can run circles around your competition who also has excuses and, just get stuff done and learn from it and then move forward and get a better version done,
Yeah. Shifting gears here a little bit, you mentioned Dan Kennedy earlier as a mentor. For folks who don't know him, he's probably, the most well-known copywriter. Excellent guy. Who are other mentors of yours, or who are other authors that you're a big fan of?
Yeah, Dan Sullivan is actually my biggest mentor. I'm part of one of his programs.
Oh, did I say Dan Kennedy?
But I actually followed Dan Kennedy and studied Dan Kennedy, John Carlton, Joe Polish, Dean Jackson, all those guys. I studied a great deal when I started my business. So I do consider Dan Kennedy is someone I learned a ton from, so it works.
Sorry for the mistake there.
No problem. But yeah, Dan Sullivan, I love. And it's instructional. I think I've realized why I've gotten sucked into the value he provides, because for 42 years, he's provided value to medium-sized business owners, not startups, not publicly traded companies. So he's speaking to a very specific audience. And the same is true for if you cater to a specific investor type or a certain type of area in the investment industry. If no one else is really adding as much value in that very specific area, and you do consistently over 10, 15, 20 years, no one else can compete with that. That's just why I love Dan Sullivan. But, early on, I was pretty heavily influenced by Eben Pagan. He was a mentor of mine. Also Brian Tracy. And then a bunch of other niche experts, like I rattled off earlier, Dean Jackson, Joe Polish. I just finished a book called Game Changers by Dave Asprey, and that's great. And then every year I read a book called The Success Principles by Jack Canfield, and I just read one chapter a night during the first quarter of the year, and it kind of resets my thinking. And every year I jot down little notes in it, and I interpret it differently, and I've got different goals and different challenges. So I find that book pretty helpful.
Yeah. That's great. I appreciate the list. There's a few of those I don't recognize. I'm going to have to go back and Google them, look them up. You talked about starting out with $800 in the bank account and $1,000 rent. Can you tell people a few of the war stories and the not being handed the silver spoon and needing to figure it out at the beginning?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll talk kind of quick so I don't bore people with it being too long-winded. But I remember, my parents gave me money for tuition for college and rent, but not to do a bunch of fun stuff. I mean, I remember getting a cheerleader's phone number in the cafeteria at my university, and I remember looking at my phone, and I didn't have enough money to call her and take her out for a cup of coffee. I didn't have $3 or $4 to spare. And I remember thinking, this sucks. I definitely need to figure my stuff out and figure out how to be productive in the world. So I graduated early, got my MBA done early. My first job out of school was making $100,000 a year just by going to everybody in the Chamber of Commerce, meeting with them, telling them to give me a chance. All of them said, no, you need experience. No, you need experience. And I said, well, just hire me. You can fire me on day one if you don't think I'm great and I'm not working hard enough for you. And that's how I got my first job that that paid really well and paid for the MBA. But then when I said, okay, this risk consulting job is deadly boring. It paid well. I got my MBA, but what am I going to do now? Because I'm 21 and no one wants to pay me that much. I realized I had to work in commercial real estate or capital raising because it's eat what you kill. And that's all people care about is what you get done. So I moved to Boston, started working to raise capital for hedge funds, long-only optimization shops, struggled until I figured out that thought leadership can help open the doors.
Were you with an RIA, or did you get licensed, or was it at a shop, or how did that work?
I was with a placement agency and pretty fresh new to the industry. I'd done a little bit of college, some angel capital raising, but was pretty new to capital raising. So the principal of the firm was licensed. And he said, hey, Richard, make your 50 calls a day, follow up with the potential investors. I'll be on the second conference call with you, et cetera. You do the first call with them, and I'll pay you for money raised. And we eventually figured out a way to raise capital through a lot of, learning by mistakes. And but when it came time that I would be paid for the capital raised, I had by chance stumbled across the term family office. And I said, well, we should only be meeting with these folks because general wealth management firms don't have enough accredited investors typically. It can be a waste of time. And the big institutions want 300 million or 500 million of assets under management. So that's a waste of our time to approach. And I said, oh, well, it's really hard to focus only on family offices. I can't find them. I can't learn about them, but they're the perfect group to go after. So I started just teaching myself by sharing through a blog what I was learning. And the website started taking off. Got 100 hits a day, 500 hits a day, got on the front page of the Boston Globe. And then my boss came to me one day and said, hey, you got to delete this blog because the media is calling and it could be a regulatory concern. And at the same time, he hadn't paid me for commissions from capital we raised. And I was like, well, that's an easy decision. So I left. And before I could get a job somewhere else, we started getting advertisers on the website, and the business kind of took off by itself. But I guess one fun story is that I remember the day we launched our first certification program. We offer online certificates on family offices, on capital raising, et cetera. And the first day we launched it, It was right after I'd started the business, and we didn't have a study guide yet. We had never written a book yet. We had no video trainings, no audio expert interviews. But I was sitting in a burrito shop, and I pushed send, and we brought in $35,000 in one day of revenue. And before that, I was working off a $50K base as a capital raiser. And I knew at that moment that I kind of sat back and said, like, oh, I've got something here. There's a real need in the market. And everything from then till now, over 12 years, has been just listening to what people want and identifying gaps and just trying to arbitrage the inefficiencies within the world of capital raising and family offices.
So you think about that huge leap there, right? Like, you know, for me as a young guy, I went from making $1,700 a month selling Yellow Page ads in Tustin, California, to a year later doing 10 grand a month at Citigroup, you know? And
right.
Those like rapid accelerations are interesting, all the preparation it takes to eventually have the tipping point happen and get into the next thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But my question for you is, there's so many people that think, you know, thought leader marketing or becoming the visible expert or these kind of things is a good idea. And then there's so few that actually reach a level similar to you where somebody says your name and people go, oh, you mean the family office guy, right? In your opinion, when you think about that, going from $50,000 for a whole year to $35,000 in one email, what are kind of the principles of becoming, you know, the principles of digging deep into a small enough niche you can own and doing enough of it to actually gain the credibility? Like what do you think the principle is, or what do you think the mistakes are that people don't become? Why are they not becoming differentiated enough, or why are they not really getting to the top of the heap and they're just one more person with an opinion?
Yeah, so many good things right in there that you just kind of packed into one. So one is one of my early on mentors, I should have said, was Jeffrey Gitomer. And he changed my life when he said in a book that I read in college, I didn't even know the family office space existed yet, but he said, I'll give away my number one secret out of all my best-selling books. This is the number one most valuable paragraph, and all my competitors could read this, but I don't care because they're all too lazy to follow it. But my number one secret is that I identified a niche audience and then just added value to them once a week. And he said, if you do that over 2 to 3 years, you'll be a local expert. Over 5-6 years, you'll be a regional expert. And after 7+ years, you'll be a global expert. And I remember the exact moment I read that, I looked up and I had a lot of energy but not focus yet. And I just remember telling myself, I'm going to be the son of a bitch that actually does it, because he just told me I'm not going to do it. And so I had started businesses my whole life, but I didn't know how I was going to apply that concept. But I just saw it as like, if this person is so successful, saying this is his most important concept that his whole business was built on. And he went from $50K a year selling sports equipment to a $10 million plus a year business, I believe is what he's at. He's one of the top 10 sales trainers globally, or at least has been for a long period of time. Then I thought, man, I have to use that idea somewhere. That's a golden nugget. So that's important. Also, defining a sandbox that you might have 1 or 2 other competitors in there with you, but it's a high value sandbox. If it has 0, if you have no one competing against you, you have to make sure that you haven't defined something so tight or you're so ahead of the curve that you're going to starve while you try to monetize, because it means it's not proven by anyone else yet. But you can get some comfort if you know someone else is doing it, but they're doing it in a different geography and no one's done it in your geography yet, but you're taking a model that has worked in Chicago or San Diego. Now you're bringing it to Dallas. Then that can give you some comfort, but I would never ever get into a space where you are blockchain investment fund number 172 and there's no huge differentiation between what you're doing and what others are doing. Just not get in the ring with 172 other boxers, because who knows who's going to be standing last, and it's going to be a long, bloody fight and a lot of effort to be declared even one of the top 10. So you need to figure out exactly who you're targeting, figure out their headaches, their opportunities, where they are, where they congregate, what do they complain about, what are they actively searching on Amazon.com, on Google, on YouTube, etc., and then construct something that, like the Hoover Dam, is capturing the energy from that river of demand from a very specific investor type, And then if you can name what you're doing in a way that you look like the Excedrin and they want to grab it because they have the exact type of migraine that your formula is built for, then that can be really powerful. And that's the type of stuff that we teach at our capital raising workshops. And I found that just about everyone starts raising capital because they're the CEO of an operating business, because they're the head of their investment firm and they're good at risk management or finding deals. Almost no one starts raising capital because they have a background in marketing, raising capital, positioning. So they're figuring all this stuff out from ground zero. And that's why, your question is great. I think that most people listening to this who are raising capital didn't think they ever would be. It's not what they went to school for. You really can't. So there's this huge gap in the marketplace of, how to get it done, how to do so effectively.
Yeah, I love it. Well, listen, I think everybody should be going to your familyoffice.com website and capital raising website, get the book. Maybe to close here, what's one of the best pieces of advice that you ever got in your life?
Sure. Before I forget, it's familyoffices.com.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We don't have both versions, not yet. Okay. But it's familyoffices.com and then capitalraising.com are the two. But your question was the best piece of advice.
Yeah, what's one of the best pieces of advice you ever feel like you got?
Well, I remember going to Evan Pagan early on when we were just approaching 7 figures in revenue, our second year in business, and I asked him, what's the most valuable book I could read to give myself momentum? And I remember him telling me that reading the book Mastering the Rockefeller Habits and implementing the idea of choke points could transform what we're doing. And that has transformed our business and really helped us move forward. And we're still identifying and acquiring more choke points within our industry. And it's one of our core values is to identify and work on those and capture them. So I think that's one of the best pieces of advice I've gotten.
It's interesting what an effect the author Verne Harnish has had. I remember speaking at a YPO event that had a couple of centimillionaires in the room, and they both talked to me about that book.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting. That's great. Yeah, it's an awesome book. I mean, I like it even better than the more updated scaling up version that Verne has. The original one, I used to make my whole team read it, and we use a lot of those concepts in our business.
Oh, that's great. Well, thanks again for making time for us here.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me, Jess. Appreciate it.
Well, that's it for the episode. One other thing I wanted to tell you about, if you remember the guys from Convoy in episodes back, Ken Free and Trent Mano, I went on one of their CEO trips to New York, and I met a guy named Brent Thompson, very successful entrepreneur. He was former CEO of Jive Communications, big company now, I think $300 or $400 million. Anyways, he started a new company called blipbillboards.com. I'm super stoked they're a sponsor now. But I remember a year and some ago when I met him, I thought it was genius. Instead of having to buy 6 months or a year's worth of billboard for thousands of dollars, you can buy 8 seconds at a time for like 10 or 20 cents. You pick what billboard you want it on, what time of day you want it to run. And it just puts so much power in the hands of marketers and CEOs who want to try something and see if it works. You can buy as many or as few as you want, change it as many times as you want. I think now our podcast is being advertised on billboards in like 18 different states because we have these guys as sponsors. We're pretty excited about it. Hope you check out blipbillboards.com. Thanks.